I mean,
We have to
for
wait
me,
for
all
Michelle.
mine work. Because did they go to public school?
Does anybody know?
They go to public school?
Yeah, we passed it on the way. Oh.
What about senior citizens?
I didn't meet him till the 8th, 9th grade.
Yeah, that's not point, that's not.
Maybe the kids would like, as we're going around, let's say we're talking about grandma, maybe they would like some of the knowledge we have about who she was and where she came from.
Yes.
And
Well,
Yes.
you're gonna give the historical
as
background.
much as like,
But all I'm saying, I'm
That would
just,
be helpful.
yeah,
I'm
because
just
it's
doing
like,
the format. We're gonna do each person individually, and then everybody's gonna chime in, and that's it. So that's what I wanna know, how should we set it up? Are you gonna just walk around? Installment 1 of the Spiro Family Memories.
Project.
As I wrote these tributes to the Spiro family members, I used a lot of words like nicest, wonderful, warm, caring, loving. I realized how blessed we are. And even though our mother was taken away way too early, I know everybody is looking down on us and very proud how we all turned out. So I want to start off with Grandma. She was just a wonderful woman in many ways. Being in a wheelchair, living alone, one of the best examples was my father called her up one day and said, "Mom, what'd you do? What'd you do today?" And she said, "Did nothing." And he says, "Well, come on, well, what'd you do?" So Grandma said, "I flipped the mattress on the bed." As a young kid, when I was 5 or 6, I would bring friends up to Grandma's to show off her prosthetic leg. I was always the show off. She was such a good sport. The best cook who ever lived, in my opinion. All I have to do is think of farfalle, garlic glazed chicken, crumb cake, chocolate cake, and a variety of soups. Made from scratch, and the leftovers were made into ruglo. Grandma was the matriarch of the Spiro clan, but she never favored one grandchild over the other, although we all knew that Patty was her favorite.
Absolutely. Standing ovation.
Which is why Stephen, all these years, said, I was Grandma's favorite.
No, that's what she told you. You never heard me say.
I certainly did.
No,
we all.
I knew deep in my heart it was Patty,
Which is why you said that.
And it should have been.
and I was upset.
Was?
I got over it. Yes,
Was
you
or
should
still
be.
It
am?
took all these years to find
took
out
me
about
80
his
years,
jealousy.
but I got over it.
Cut. Anything else? Cousins would come from the entire tri-state area to visit Aunt Hannah. Truly, she was loved by many. Many nights when my father worked, I would go to Grandma's. This is, when I was in college. She would make the perfect dinner. I would dry the dishes, and we would watch Gunsmoke, Perry Mason, I've Got a Secret, Paladin. She liked her westerns.
You didn't write that page?
I left room for more notes, but I didn't need it. Okay, so now we want to go around the room and share other memories of Grandma. So, Patty, you want to take it away?
Oh my
Can you
goodness.
state her full name? We haven't done that yet. You've just been
Hannah,
calling her Grandma.
Hannah Ansvalder was her father's name, and her mother was Yetta Ball. And her father died. She had an older brother, Rudy, and Abe, and she was the youngest. And then her father died, and her mother remarried Brown, her brother-in-law, right? Because his wife died.
You better write this down, because you're
No,
not going to
we're
remember.
gonna make a genogram.
Okay.
But no, but we'll make, as much as.
Get a little
you know,
closer.
Stephen has
We do, we
maybe
have a
you
lot
know
of,
it.
we have a lot
Right.
of detail.
But the point being then, she ended up having 3 stepsisters who were her first cousins.
Oh, right, yes, that makes
And
sense.
then together with Grandpa Brown, whose first name I don't know.
Joe.
No, that was her brother, Joe
I
Brown.
think his name was Joe. But okay, doesn't matter.
So anyway, then they had 2 more kids, and that was Aunt Tilly and Uncle Joe Brown. Okay. One of my mother's favorite stories about, just to get one mentioning Uncle Joe Brown, is her memory of the end of the First World War. Was on the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour, they rang the bells, and everybody went out of school, went home. There was confetti everywhere, balloons.
Where was she?
She was in New York, going to school, public school. So she was born in 1910, so what was the end of the First World War was
45?
What?
44.
So that's
Oh, the
World
first?
War, yeah.
17.
Yeah, so, anyway, that's about Uncle, and then the thrill of hooray, Uncle Joe Brown was coming home from the war and he was alive. So, anyway, that was Hannah's, a little bit of Hannah's background.
What about
What?
her other 2 sisters? Esther.
Those are her
The Buzz
stepsisters, yeah, her stepsisters.
What's
Stephen,
your-
fill it in.
No, it was called Mine, Yours, and Ours. And there were 2 more sisters that were her stepsisters. It was Esther and Rosie.
Minnie?
Rose.
No, it was
yeah.
Rosie and Esther. So, and they were all close. They saw each other, and in fact, that's how the Buzzin' Cousins started. And every Father's Day, the entire family, all their brothers and sisters, and all their children, there must have been about 60 of us, we met every Father's Day at Belmont Lake State Park. And Patty came down from Boston. I remember driving in my Uncle George's tan station wagon, where we used to load it up.
Yeah, we didn't have any seats in the back. That was when I was really a little
Right,
girl.
and-
That was when we were still living in
And
New York.
all the men
Yeah.
in the afternoon used to go in the back of that car and play gin. But that was 60 of us. And we spent the whole day, and we did it every year for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years. And that was a big day. From Parkchester going out to Long Island to Belmont Lake State Park was just wonderful.
So I would say for me, Grandma was and continues to be the touchstone of my life. No matter what I go through, there's something that brings up about Grandma. Even now, when we moved into a condo and we have a small kitchen and I struggle cooking, or now when I have trouble standing too long because of my hip, I say to myself, if Grandma can do it in her teeny little kitchen, you could hardly turn around in that kitchen in Parkchester, then I can do it. So all through my life, she's just been the touchstone. So I have so many wonderful stories, it's hard to think about all the ones that I could share. But, you know, we were separated from Grandma because we moved to Boston. My father was a Bostonian and needed to get a job at one point. Actually, let's just backtrack to Grandma's accident. Stephen, you probably remember it more vividly. I was 3 years old, and my mother had bursitis, and Grandma was coming from the Bronx to us in Washington Heights, and she went to cross the street on Broadway, and a city truck ran over her. And she was in the hospital for, 11 months?
And we were lucky because the identical time of the accident, there was an ambulance coming by and picked her up. And that's what really saved her, because the Jewish Memorial Hospital was only about, I don't know, a mile away from that point. But I guess I'll start, because I'm probably the only one who remembers Grandma before the accident. And I remember my grandfather coming home from the road. He used to sell music books. And he left on a Monday, and he would always come home Friday, early afternoon, and lay down, take a nap. And then I would come up about, I don't know, 6 o'clock, and Grandma made Friday night dinner. And Grandma was a real movie buff. She saw every movie. And on Friday nights, we used to go to the Lowey's American almost every Friday night that I can remember. And I also remember when 4 days, or maybe it was that, when Harold was born, my grandmother took me down to the French hospital to wave to my mother at the window. But she used to run around and run around and run around.
We never knew her like
Yeah.
that at all. I mean, I was too young to remember.
You know,
Yeah.
she was always there making, I remember kindergarten, Christmas, and she made cookies and ran to the school because I forgot them. I forgot to go up there to get them. So she ran to school and came in my kindergarten class. I was so proud. And she stayed there for the party. And then she walked home with me. And my first day of school, I remember my mother and my grandfather walked me to my first kindergarten class in PS 102.
Which grandpa?
I only knew one
All right.
because Nana's died before I was born.
Because he was 57, we won't go there, it's a different side of the family.
And my grandmother used to run around. She used to go to Brooklyn at least once a week to visit her sisters. And she was always baking and always brought us some cakes. And she never stopped because Monday through Friday, Grandpa was on the road. And I guess she was probably the finest human being I've ever met. She was the advice giver to the family. And anyone, they all came to Hannah for advice. And I remember one time, my parents waited 5 years before they got married. And they believed that you shouldn't get married until your apartment was furnished. And
Who
that was
believed?
their advice to me
Oh.
when I was going with Adele. And I went up to Grandma and we had this long conversation. And
Can you speak a little louder?
she ended it by saying, "Do you love Adele?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Don't wait. Get married now." And I did. I came out of the Army in August, and in September we were married. And I always went to Grandma for advice. She was always there. And as I said, she was the most wonderful human being in my life. Yes, my mother, my father, my family. But she was, as Harold said, she was the patriarch. Matriarch, and the most beautiful person.
She did always give advice when we'd come down to New York every school vacation, and she had the teeniest little kitchen, and there was no place to sit, but there was the corner at a little table, and there were those stools, those boxes that Grandpa used to have his music books in, and I could sit on that, and she'd let me have coffee in my milk. Oh God, that was such a treat. But then she'd have remember that big cup of coffee that she'd always have? A huge cup. And I can picture, and she could pull out that little wooden bread thing from the thing, and she'd have her cup there, and I'd sit there, and the phone would ring, and it would be one of her nieces, and she would be on the phone giving advice. And the one I remember the most that she always talked with was so empathetic. To me, she was the first social worker in the family in many ways, because I had listened to Stephen Onswald. What was the mom's name? just
Selma.
Selma. Of course, she was broken. What happened? There's always tragedies in every family at various times, as you well know. Well, Stephen Answalter, who was older than you, so this is, anyway, this is her niece by marriage. Alex was the first cousin, and his wife, Selma, and they had 2 kids. Stephen, who was older, and he went off to Syracuse, right? He was at Syracuse as a freshman, and it was the polio epidemic. And he died very quickly from the polio, right? And so her heart was broken forever. And of course, as most couples have, you know, you lose a child, they don't always grieve together. So Alex, I think, ended up, I mean, he didn't become an alcoholic, but he kind of turned it inward and drank a lot. And Selma needed someone to talk to all the time. And Grandma was her therapist. Grandma was her support. So she would call, Grandma would drink the coffee, and she'd be loving and supportive to Selma. And that's, I think, the way she was with everybody, with all of us.
My grandmother had a great routine that I knew what, if I came up on a Wednesday, I knew what she would be doing. Monday, she took out her scrub wash in the sink, and she used to scrub the wash, and it took her 3 or 4 hours. She did the whole wash, rinsed it out. That was it for Monday. Tuesday, she ironed all day. Wednesday, she did the bathroom floor and the kitchen floor, and she got down on her knee, her one knee, and she scrubbed with,
I remember seeing her lean over in her wheelchair.
but she used to be able to get out of the chair and scrub the floor, and then sometimes I'd help her put newspapers down on the floor so they would be okay. So Friday morning she'd take it up so Grandpa would come to a clean kitchen and bathroom. And then that was Wednesday and Thursday, and at Thursday she would clean the whole house and make the beds. And she was busy all day, and she always did it from the chair, or she got out on her knees. She was unbelievable.
What was
And,
her interaction with Lenore and Morton?
Well, Lenora and my grandmother were very close as a mother-daughter. I mean, if they didn't speak together 2 or 3 times a day, I'd be surprised. I don't know how many times they spoke. My father, his entire life, every Tuesday and every Friday after dinner, he would go up to my grandmother and grandfather, and on Sunday. So 3 days a week, he always went to their apartment and spent the afternoon. And then he came back and we all had dinner together.
You know, when Grandpa...
They were very close as a family.
Very close, but also, you know, it was a different generation where people didn't have health insurance, people didn't have life insurance, there was no Social Security. When it finally did come in with, you know, Roosevelt, but, you know, they didn't have a lot of money. And so from the second Grandpa stopped working, both my parents and your parents supported them forever. You know, that's what you did. You took care of your parents. They didn't constantly take care of you.
So I want the 3 of you to take note of that.
Right. And you too.
You have insurance and dental.
Right, right. But it was, that's the way generations, all kinds of families, all kinds of ethnic groups and religious groups.
And Grandma's was the meeting place. We must have had 10 to 20 relatives, and Becky, and Kitty,
Oh, my
and
goodness.
everyone came up
That's
to my
on Grandpa's side of the family.
Right, everyone came up at night to my grandmother's house. A funny story, my other grandmother was younger than Grandma and Grandpa. And she lived above us.
Bertha.
And Bertha. And she used to come up to my grandmother's house 2 or 3 times, and Grandma would say, "Oh, here comes the old lady." Remember that?
I sure do.
And she was really younger than my
She was
grandmother.
a big woman, too.
Yes.
I remember Harold and I, we were nice kids, I think. That's hard to remember.
Well, speak for yourself.
when she
Don't include me.
At Grandma's house, she had this red sofa,
Right.
right? And so Grandpa would be sitting in his chair, Grandma would be in her, the TV was here, small living room, and Hannah would be in her chair.
She'd be on
And
the couch.
there was a few, and so Nana Kuhn would sit down in the couch, and it was not easy for her to move herself up and down, so she would sit down, and you and I we would laugh about it later, that when she sat and we had already been sitting, we'd pop up.
And could she eat?
We didn't do it in front of her, but.
When she came to our apartment one day, and I remember this, it was my father, Harold, me, and my grandmother. My mother made 110 potato pancakes. And I remember she had 20. Not that we didn't have 20, but she had 20. She could eat as much as any man I know.
But what did she always say? I don't eat as much as I used to. That's what she said.
You know, there's the other side to this. This was a woman who was often in excruciating pain. You know, she would get these stump attacks because they had amputated her leg. It was her left leg, right? And in those days, they would do what they did to the people that came back from the Second World War. They didn't know a lot about amputation, and they would leave a lot of nerve endings on the stump. They barely saved the right leg. It was pretty gouged out and stuff, but they were able to save that. But she would get these, what they call phantom pains in her stump, and she it would just,
Well, not only that, she could be sitting there,
And it
and the
would jump.
stump just went like this.
right.
And it could go on for an hour.
It would be excruciating. So talking about pills, at least, she had to be on a lot of pills, a lot of medication. And I remember, because we slept over when we came to New York, naturally. And, you know, bringing her water by the side of her bed. She'd take her teeth out, and she'd start taking all the pills at night. So in today's world, she would probably be considered addicted to opiates.
Yeah. I mean, one of the memories, what she would do when the kids came up, Elise wanted to sit in her wheelchair. So my grandmother got out of the wheelchair, hopped behind, Elise got in, and Grandma moved her all the way through the rooms, and she laughed and laughed and laughed.
She also always had toys for us. She had that big giraffe stuffed animal, like the Toys R Us. That's the one I remember the most, was the big giraffe.
Yeah, we had it in our house later.
Yes. And it was always fun to go. She would babysit for me sometimes. I remember once I was mad, and I still don't like this woman. She's probably dead now. But there was a cousin, Lenore.
Yes,
Yes.
Lenore.
Yeah, well, she came over when I was there, and she talked to Gigi the whole time, and like I wasn't there. And I hated her ever since then.
See, I remember you coming up to Grandma's, and your enjoyment was going into her pots and pans and playing forever
Oh,
and
see,
making
I don't remember
noises.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
she did.
You
But
did.
Yeah, oh, I
that's
bet.
the old way that people would do it.
Oh, yeah.
Kids didn't have a lot of toys. You take out the pots and pans, you get the wooden spoon, and then you could have a whole drum set, and, you
And
know.
I also
you
remember
do.
a yellow bowl.
Is there a candy dish or something?
It was like
No.
a big yellow, and
Yellow
it
glass
dinged.
bowl.
There
Yes,
was
and
a
you
glass bowl
could,
that sat on the
and you could put your finger against it and it made a ding.
No,
Table.
on the dining room.
On the dining room table.
Right, and the doily that she.
Yes, the
that
doily.
Crochet, the doily, and you know, talking about that, the handiwork she did. My mother and I would often go in Boston to Jordan Marsh, we go downtown, we go to the linen department, and we bought all those linens where she could make all the tablecloths. And she'd do all the
She would
little
embroider
handiwork,
the
embroider all the
tablecloth.
tablecloths. And then she would make it for that cousin and that grandchild and that, this. So everybody got some of Hannah's
Where did she
tablecloth.
What happened to all of them?
What?
Where did she grow up?
Where did Hannah grow up? She and Grandpa met on the Lower East Side.
Okay.
That's where they grew up.
So is that where she was born?
I thought
Yes.
I thought they grew up in Brooklyn.
No. Lenore and Morton grew up and their childhood in Brooklyn. But Sam and Hannah grew up in the Lower
Wait,
East
Aunt
Side.
Lenore and Papa grew up in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Where?
No, they didn't totally grow. They lived in Brooklyn for a while, and then they were in the Bronx on Amsterdam Avenue.
Oh, that's how they got to the Bronx.
Yeah.
Weren't they in Washington Heights for a while?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's in Manhattan.
right.
Wait, what?
Washington Heights.
Yeah, Washington Heights is in Manhattan.
Not they, but the Lenore and Morton didn't live
No,
in
that was
Washington
Nana.
Heights.
No.
They
No.
moved there
I thought
later.
Papa
No, they
told me he
did.
lived in Washington Heights.
Because my father and my mother met at George Washington High School on the Heights
Oh, then they did, I guess.
for a certain period of time.
I know that Madeline and Morton, they were in the same Temple Youth Group,
Right.
right?
I didn't know that.
And my other grandmother had a millinery store on Broadway.
Had a what?
Millinery? What's
Hats.
millinery?
Hats. See that? We don't call them millinery anymore.
I knew
No
it
one
was.
does.
You know, you talk about Washington Heights. How ironic is it that my father had a fix-it shop?
Spider-Man.
No,
And we can't do anything.
right, but he had. a
Speak for yourself.
In the Union Plaza in the Bronx.
Oh, in the Bronx? Okay. With Milton.
I thought he was a movie projector.
Milton Cushing.
Oh, his
Cushing?
friend?
Yeah. A fix-it shop.
Yeah, the irony is too great to
Right.
even fathom.
How did Lenore and George meet?
Oh,
Over
Lenore.
at Maloney Sandwich.
Lenore started working after show business died in vaudeville, which we should get back
Yeah,
to
we'll
because
come
it
back to that.
involves both sides of the family, the talented children of America. But anyway, Lenore was working for, at that point, White's, R.H. White's. And they had a store, she went to work in Boston. And so, actually, they met through a tragedy too. My father had a brother, his nickname was Pat, everybody called him Pat, but his name was Samuel
And that's who
Peter.
you're named after.
Right. And anyway, he died the year before they met. And at his Shiva, some friends got together and said, Georgie, you should meet this girl, Lenore, a New Yorker.
He was living in New York?
No, he was in
all
Boston. This
Oh,
was in
this all
Boston.
happened in Boston.
She, on her
Right.
own, moved to Boston. She was like a pioneer.
Yeah,
No, she moved because of what? She had a
Her
job.
job.
I
Yeah,
understand,
but
how
she's
many
still-
women in that day and age moved to a different city for a job? Not many.
So she got the job and then moved.
yes, right. So a year after my father's brother died,
Right.
she was up there and she had met some people in Algonquin Beach. And then they said, oh, we should fix you up with this gal. So they went on their first date. And Georgia was very enamored with her. And anyway, so then the rest is history. They got married very quickly and they eloped.
They had to get married.
No, they did not, because I came much later.
But you know who did have to get married?
Who?
My grandparents.
Hannah and Sam.
Yeah.
You figured that out?
We did. You and I did.
Oh, we did? I forgot
Yes.
that already.
We went and we found Pop's birth certificate and realized that it was before, that it was not the amount of time he was conceived before they got married. Hence why she didn't say you had to buy furniture when you got married.
Do you remember Lenore before she got married?
Yes.
Of course.
She had a wonderful apartment. And I remember staying over and used to look down. And there was a garden. And there was a bird bath
Wait, in New York or Boston?
in Boston.
Boston.
And I always loved to
Oh,
go
that was on
there.
Marlboro.
So I can watch the birds in the bath.
Oh, Of course, with I think we mentioned this last night, but she had the whole apartment filled with pictures of Stephen. And when they went out, Georgie, second date or something like that, he came up to the apartment and she said, "How do you like my boy?" And we thought, oh my God, I didn't know there was a kid involved with this woman. So her first nephew, she was very enamored with.
In fact, the first time my grandparents met George, he was late, and he ran up, and he never changed, and he was coming from his place, which was salamis and bolognas, and my father looked at my grandmother, this was told, and said, "Holy cow, is this who she's picking? He smells like hell."
She was dating a lawyer too. They wanted her to marry the lawyer. But anyway, over the years, he brought them a lot of hot dogs and salami and bologna.
We never bought delicatessen, because my grandparents came down, they must have gone to Boston every other month. And they used to come down with all the meats you could possibly want.
How did they get up there? Train?
No, Grandpa had a car.
Okay.
He had a car. It was 40. The one I remember was because we eventually got it, and it was a 49 black Plymouth with a stick shift, of course. But Lenore tells the story. You want to know about their first car? Sam's first car.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they went up to Maine for the summer. And I don't know whether it's the same summer. I think they were up at different times. But when just to backtrack, Hannah's mother died, according to my mother, she had a depression. She was very attached.
She had a nervous
to
breakdown.
Yeah, which means she was depressed, severely depressed. And so they went up to Maine because the doctors had said if you go to the edge of the water, the ice cold water, just have her sit there and have the waves. You know, it was like
I thought that
a
was
natural.
for Gigi.
No, that was
for
her.
mother.
No, that
That
was
was for
her.
Hannah.
For Hannah, that's what I thought. I thought that was for him.
No. This is Hannah.
Hannah had a
who had a
nervous breakdown.
depression when her mother died. Her own mother died.
Thank you. Yes,
Yetta.
I heard the
Yetta,
water
you could
thing.
see
Yes,
her
yes, yes,
when
yes.
Yetta died. So they went up to Maine. So now my mother's story, and I'm not sure this is the same time or another time, is that they took a bus and a train. You'll hear that on that tape I gave you.
They went up to Maine.
Right, they went up to Maine. Grandpa had some business to do up there. He was selling his books. And so he dropped them off Maine, some island, and came back. So, no, they took a train and a bus and a boat or something. They didn't have a car yet. And then he came back and he bought their first car. And it was a Buick Roadster. And he drove it back up to Maine and surprised them all.
And then he
with their
gave it to
first
you?
car. No, not that first car. This is the old Buick Roadster when they were children. But his last car was the 49 Plymouth, which they had to take away from Grandpa. Do you remember that? No. Oh, you were too young, probably.
So Lenore and Morton were up in Maine also.
Yeah, Lenore and Morton. And then there was another time where I remember Lenore telling a story where cousin Alex
Your mom.
on Zawalter, yeah, Lenore, cousin Alex on Zawalter. So it was Hannah's nephew was up staying with them, and Alex and Morton were very good friends, very close growing up. And I guess there was a fire on the island, and all the bells were ringing. I don't know. And Alex slept through the whole thing. And I don't forget the whole story, but my mother loved that story.
You know, but before my father became a motion picture operator, for 5 or 6 years he sold canaries and was
The
traveling. Yeah. And he traveled around, and that's how one time he got up to Maine. But he used to sell all these birds.
Is that how you end up having some birds?
Pardon?
Is that how you end up having the birds?
Yeah, you had birds. You had like 13 or 14 birds.
Yeah, and you told me the story.
What?
Yeah, you told me the story. The one flew over the pot of boiling
Yeah.
water,
It
and
fell in.
the
Is that a
steam
real
sucked
story?
it in.
That's a
And
I
real
have
story.
never heard that story.
I have. One of Dad's
My,
was in the apartment.
my mother said you can keep the birds if they stay in your room. and this one opened up the door to come in, and one of them got out. And my mother was boiling water for pasta,
This is a terrible story.
and the damn bird flew over, and the steam caught him, and he went right through.
I don't believe that.
Oh, I've heard this story many times.
It's absolutely true.
Every family has its tragedies.
Paul, when did you first meet Hannah?
I mean, and it tasted just like chicken.
When did you first meet Hannah?
Had to be for probably the Rosh Hashanah one year when, right after Pat and I met. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, I can't hear myself. And Hannah was up from New York, and one of the many things that she made was tegela. I don't know if you've ever had or know what tegela is. It's like rolled dough, and it's coated with honey and some nuts.
Like Rugala?
No.
Okay.
In any event, when I walked into the apartment and we were all talking and everything, and I saw it, I said, "Oh, tegela," because I hadn't had it in so long. My grandmother used to make it. And when I said that, she smiled, because up till then, I don't think she thought I was Jewish.
Because all through college, I was always in love with some fantastic.
Yeah, that Greek guy.
Oh,
Remember?
that was kindergarten.
No.
I'd like to share one of my precious stories with Grandma. This was when I was a senior in college, and just a sense of her always being there for us. And so I wanted to go to Columbia. That was my first choice for social work school. And I came to New York, and I had my interview, and I thought I blew it entirely. And it was the social work school was down the street from the Guggenheim Museum. So I walked down to the Guggenheim, and there was the Klimt exhibit, not Klimt. The Scream. All of a sudden, I'm getting my artists mixed up.
Oh, Edward.
Yeah, Munch exhibit,
yeah.
I got my country right, but the wrong artist. So anyway, and it's the Scream, you wind your way all the way up, and I got to the top and I cried my eyes out, screaming inside. And then I found a payphone there, and I called my grandmother, and I was crying, and she said, "Take the train up to the Bronx and come visit me right away." So I did, and I got there, and she said to me, "Go in the closet, and on the top shelf is an old bottle of B&B, which is a liquor." She said, "We've had it for years. Grandpa would save it for company." She said, "Take it down." And I never in my life saw her have a drink. And the two of us shared this bottle of B&B.
I love that.
That's a great story.
And we cried. She cried with me. Anyway, and then when I was at Columbia, I was telling her about my first client, because I worked for child welfare. And it was a young student from White Plains, and she was a black child, and she was being kicked out of school because of her oppositional behavior. And we had to place her in a treatment center, and there was no treatment center available. So my job was to be with her all the time. So I told her about this young girl, who I'll never forget in my life. She taught me so much. Anyway, and Grandma said, "Would you like to bring her for Friday night dinner?" I just thought, that was her way again of giving. I think Grandma, I can't do that, with a client, but it's just already she was pulling somebody in. Her heart was just so big. So that's my favorite memory. And then there's Grandpa. And my grandparents would come up and visit us, or drive back to New York, and in this car, I'd sit up in the front seat, and Grandpa had a pretty, well, he swore a lot, and he'd get very aggravated, and every driver, I mean, I guess it was rage, you know, road rage, and I'd charge him a nickel for every time he swore. And then Grandma would pull out her little compact, and she let me powder my nose. So it was a long ride between Boston and New York in those days on the road, no highways.
It was Route 1, and it took over 7 hours.
Yeah,
I
you remember that.
Yes.
How often did you guys go up to Boston?
Not often.
Not often? Pat?
I went up often,
I had to go down and visit
especially in the
Grandma.
summers.
We had a great summer. You were too little, right? You were a baby, man, I don't remember.
I was too young
Yeah.
on the Cape.
We rented a little cottage, my parents rented a cottage in Mashpee Village on Cape Cod with Grandma and
We
Grandpa.
were there for almost a month.
And Stephen came, and we played casino.
What?
We played casino parts. That was fun. And Grandpa never wore, I don't remember in any of the pictures, at the beach, he always wore like a t-shirt. You know, like men used to wear bathing tops.
So what was the kid's first memory?
I
Of
think
what?
the two of us are the only ones who have a
I don't
memory
remember.
of Gigi.
I don't remember a bad thing.
Minus to know how I was there.
I don't remember
Okay.
it at all.
So I remember I was 8 when Grandpa passed away. And I remember coming home from elementary school, and there was Grandpa right in front of Wamrat's was a little card store on the corner, and he would hold up that entire building. And then when we'd go to eat at Grandma's Friday nights, or really any night, I mean, it was always, you know, the best meal. But every night he had to have either the Daily News or the Daily Mirror. And I know I would get an ice cream sandwich if I went with him. So as soon as I saw him get up, I would just follow right behind him, and then as soon as he opened up the doors, he'd say, "What do you want? Get out of here!" And I wouldn't listen to him, and then we'd go down, and I would always get my ice cream sandwich. So I only have fond memories.
What did he call you?
Everybody called me Harold at the time.
There's no Hal.
No, the name changed, believe it or not, is after I graduated high school, I went to camp as a counselor. And I know I introduced myself as Harold because that's what everybody called me. But all the kids called me Hal. And from then on, I used Hal. But my mother was the only one that did call me Hal.
Called you Harold.
No, she called me Hal. Not all the time, but
What did they call you? What did your grandparents call you? Patsy.
When I was in high school, I became Patsy. I and a heart. Or a big circle. No, you know, I mean, you played with how your penmanship was, and, you know, and then as you wrote, and being in love with so-and-so and a big heart or whatever.
What did they call you? No Stevie? No Steven?
Yeah, some, but my friend, all your friends called you by your last name, so I was Spiro.
really. See, now, my friends never called me Spiro, but now these guys are always called Spiro. I don't know how it happens like that.
It's the time.
I think we're losing the room.
What do you mean?
Because it's yeah.
Oh, we're gonna go through. Okay,
Yeah.
next, Aunt Lenore. After my mother passed, she was there for me. When I needed help selecting a college, after New Falls, she was there. You know, find a place to go to school. She maneuvered it that I went to Curry College, and that was a springboard to Northeastern, where Danny followed me there, And what a great choice to be going to a school within the best college town. Obviously a great cook, learning from her mother. I had so many wonderful meals with her. My roommates knew I was going to Aunt Lenore's house when I wore a collared shirt. Aunt Lenore was like Jackie Onassis. Always looked perfect and very stylish. Aunt Lenore was always so nice to me, but if she did not agree with me, she let me know, and she was always right. She was a beautiful woman in the image of the other women in the Spiro clan. I will always be indebted to her for all the acts of kindness she showered on me. Next.
She loved her nephews so much. She just adored both of them.
She adored her brother.
She adored, she told a story, when they were growing up, they had to share a room, Morton and Lenore. And there was like a curtain they had between the two of them. And I guess my mom, like me, had some fears of the dark. And so she always told the story about, say, she'd go, "Morton, are you there, Morton?" And then he wouldn't answer because he'd be sleeping. And she'd yell louder, "Morton, are you there?" So they depended on each other a great deal. And, she and Madeline became very good sisters. They really loved each other a great deal because they had all grown up together too, in the same neighborhood. So
Lenore knew Madeline independent of Morton.
Well,
No.
more through Morton, because Madeline, I don't know, I don't remember if Madeline was a little bit older, yes, because she was
Yeah, she was.
close to Morton's age, yeah, so she was a little
She
bit
was
older.
2 years younger than me.
What was the age difference between Lenore and Morton?
3 years? I don't know, my mother got her birthdays mixed up because she went into show business and had to lie about her age, and then she got confused, she didn't know what was the truth sometimes and what was real. So it got a little confusing there, especially working out Social Security for her. Anyway, that's another story. But Morton and Madeline were very close. I don't know, that picture, I think that picture in that book, at Morton's 90th birthday, my mom had been sick for a number of years before that. We insisted going back to Florida, but I said, "You have to."
You don't remember that?
Totally.
Mother Mahogany's meatless meatballs?
I remember I don't remember doing it.
Okay.
It was fun. I
Okay.
remember it too. But we came out and performed.
Carry on. Next.
Well, it was always a thrill for us to have you guys come to Boston. You were my little brother coming to school near us. And so, thank goodness I didn't, even though I have Grandma's scrubboard, one of her old scrubboards, I didn't have to do your laundry on the scrubboard. But you always brought your laundry over, and at least we had a washer or dryer. But then we put Hal to work, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we lived in our first house, and the washer and dryer were down like in the boiler room, and the soot would come to the cleanliest laundry room. So, but it was disgusting down there, and Hal got the job of painting the little laundry room that was constantly full of soot.
And did a very nice job.
He did, and he signed it too. So he got
You
that
gotta work
job.
for your supper.
Right. But, so, and we had him with us for 5 years, right? Because of the Northeastern Study Program.
Yeah.
That was great.
And at the time, I was taking some insurance courses over at Northeastern, and guess who was manning the parking lot?
Yeah, I had it part-time.
Right.
That was,
It's the only way I get a parking space any place close to Northeastern. Harold was there.
oh, that was,
For brothers and sisters. And my aunt was always there when my father had his 2 hip operations,
Oh, he came to live with
was
us.
there.
And Grandma was up too, in my old bedroom. Grandma had one bed, Morton had the other.
When Harold went to school, they were there. I remember Uncle George gave him a job in the factory. And she was always there. Everyone that saw her thought she was so regal. She was like the
Very regal.
She did, that's all because of the dancing. Years
Her
of
movement,
dancing.
her posture.
Yes. It's like hanging up.
But it was the way she dressed and the way she, even her
Even the way
jewelry.
she spoke.
Her jewelry and everything.
I can't even say darling the way she
But you know,
says
she
darling.
didn't finish high school. She was on the road and shows it when she was 16, so she never finished high school.
And was she in the, she wasn't in the traveling show of,
No.
no.
What? She was in
My
traveling shows.
No,
grandfather,
but not,
my grandfather,
Madeline's father.
right, had a traveling children's show
Yes.
and traveled all around the United States. It was called Talented Children of America.
If
yeah.
you open
So
that
she
up,
was in it?
she in New York. She didn't. Later on, she was in the Schubert Theater shows.
And
She
she
was
she
older.
performed with Milton Berle, right?
No, they went to dance class together.
This, so
They
this
were on
was
the
my
subway.
great grandfather's?
Milton Berle. Yes, Lenore belonged to the Talented Children of America, which was your grandfather on the other side. So they all knew each other.
But it was, Milton Berle was Minnie's cousin, Aunt Minnie's cousin.
Right, but my mother went to dancing school with them.
Yeah, it was
She
something,
did.
yeah, she did something.
And they took the subway together.
And something with Billy DeWolf?
That's who she went with. She went with Billy DeWolf, not Milton Berle.
I thought it was both.
She went to dancing school with Milton Berle, and then she knew Billy DeWolf later. She was in a Schubert show with him. But anyway, you know, and in that, you could see that was the show where it was for the Mississippi, benefit for the Mississippi floods, I guess, all over the country. I don't know if that's the one, but in one of her scrapbooks, and that's where she met, I'm having a senior moment, Fanny Bryce.
This was Fanny Bryce.
Fanny Bryce was in the show, and my mother did an invitation to Fanny Bryce in the show as one of the children. And then she was invited backstage to meet Fanny Bryce, who was smoking a cigarette.
And Houdini.
Yes. Right. And one of the Barrymores was in that show.
Yep, Ethel Barrymore.
When did she stop dancing? You know how old about? What age she?
Well, she was in vaudeville.
Right.
Okay, and then on one of those tapes, she'll tell you, she says, speaks, the tape I gave her speaks to that a little bit. So she was in vaudeville, and with the Depression and the Second World War, vaudeville died.
Okay.
And to be on the Broadway stage, there wasn't much. People couldn't afford to go to those shows. And the whole Schubert theater complex that was all over the country that had all these traveling shows. Yeah.
But Michelle spoke earlier about, you know, she's kind of a pioneer in her time. I mean, she sounded like before she got married, she was fairly independent,
Yeah.
which was not very common at the time. Was
Well-
that inspired by your grandmother and
No, I don't
supported
think
by
so.
that?
Oh,
Or-
sure. Well, when she was 16, she wanted to be in a show, and it was in Chicago. And Hannah would not let Lenore go, but one of Hannah's stepsisters, you know, from her second dad, lived in Chicago. One of the the three gals, lived in Chicago. And Jenny was the other one. And Aunt Jenny lived in Chicago, and my mother lived with Aunt Jenny while she was in that show. So by 16, she had moved on. Right. But the reason she went into, and this is how you guys got into marketing. Grandpa's best friend was Milton Spiro.
And Milton Spiro was my godfather.
And Milton and his wife, Aunt May, yes. And they had one daughter, Joy, who was as if she was Morton and Lenore's little sister.
And that's also her middle name.
And that's my middle name. I was named after Joy, because Joy died of a streptococcus infection the year before penicillin was available.
And they had a beautiful apartment on Central Park South. And overlooked the park. And he was the one who got my aunt a job in Macy's.
That's what happened after she was in vaudeville.
And he was the divisional vice president of all domestics
In the linen department.
in the women domestics.
Yeah.
And, you know, once or twice a year, he used to take me to the market. And I thought it was so glamorous, and all these people bowed to him and took him to lunch. And I loved that. And that was my inspiration, plus my aunt. So when I didn't go to college and looked for a job, I looked retailing.
After the army.
No, before the army. And it was after the army, before the recall. And Federated was one of the best retailers known. They had about 8 or 9, 10 divisions. So they were in need of a clerical. I applied and I got it.
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
And then you followed along too.
And then I followed along.
And then you followed along. I had the privilege of being with Michelle when she bought her first
That's interview suit.
power suit.
And I actually went to Macy's just like she did, and it was really Macy's when I went. It's not Macy's anymore. But
No.
I went to the same Macy's that Lenore worked for, and she used to tell me stories about how in order to get your sales numbers, you have to count the number of tickets that were sold. So you would, that's why the price tickets used to rip in half, and you would
Pinball
count
tickets.
those at the end of the day, because there was no computer to pull up your numbers. And so they would count the tags, and yeah, she was around when I was at Macy's, and I think, there was something about that she was happy with.
Oh, yeah. But it all started with Grandpa's
I didn't know
best
that.
friend. That's how, yeah.
And she had a sister named Nellie who lived in Pennsylvania.
Who did?
Aunt May.
Aunt May? Yeah.
Because they didn't have any other children.
No, it was just Joy, their only child, yeah.
And he passed before I was born, I guess, because I don't.
Yeah, he remarried after Aunt May died. I forget her name. And they moved to Florida. But there's some wonderful old pictures of the four of them. They were good friends
They
as
moved
couples.
to Hollywood, Florida.
Right.
So Lenore had this kind of adventurous spirit to her.
Well, she
But-
did. At one point, I have a picture of her in a prop plane when she must have been 16 or 17 years old.
Not many people
too.
got on planes back then.
No, but then she was afraid of flying for the rest of her life.
But Morton just stayed put.
Yeah. We entered Parkchester in 1942.
And he moved out in 1989. I remember it was the year I graduated college.
And he graduated high school and went straight to work. What did he do first?
Canaries.
Oh, yeah,
That was his first job? Who do you sell canaries to? I don't understand.
Where do you get them? Where do you get canaries?
Store.
Where do you get them from?
in the
Wait, what?
Canary Islands.
Wait, what did you say now? There was no pet stores?
No, we sold them to pet stores.
So he sold canaries
Like
wholesale?
Woolworth, though.
I
It was like a
understand.
wholesale.
Yeah, he was a wholesale canary
Where do they
salesman.
come
He
from?
worked for a canary company.
Yeah, that
He
hatched
never
them,
told
I
us
don't
about
know.
that.
I didn't know this either. I mean, I'm just learning this.
Were you alive when he did this?
Yes, the bird dropped in the tank.
No, that's Dad did that on his own.
No.
When-
No, but where do you think he got the birds from?
No,
No, that was his own thing, his own hobby.
What?
The canary selling and Dad's bird things are totally
Completely
separate.
Oh, I asked. I said, well, then that explains
My,
where
wait
you
a
got the
minute,
birds
my
from.
father
The passion.
had sold the canaries way before I was born.
That's what I was asking.
Before he was
Oh, I asked
married.
before.
I was with you.
Okay. Uncle George.
Reel this in.
Oh, do you have?
No, I assume-
Are you gonna get to Mad one?
Well, yes.
Tonight? Oh, okay.
Did you not read the itinerary?
I was gonna say.
Uncle George, he was one of the finest men I ever met. Never a negative word about anyone. And he shared his Bringham's ice cream with me. What more can you ask for?
Who was this?
Uncle George. If I said Bringham's, who would you think of?
I think of Paul.
No.
You have to be
In fact, Paul asked me,
the only kind of-
last night, he said, where's the Brigham ice cream? Well,
I remember when I came
That's why my
over.
father and George got along.
Remember when I came over for dinner at Aunt Lenore's? This is when I was at Curry, which is in Milton, Mass, and he would drive me home. That was so thoughtful. I sometimes ask myself why I never asked Uncle George to teach me how to play golf. Although there were not many golf courses in the Bronx. I do remember him never passing a mirror without swinging a golf club. One co-op corner, I could not get a co-op job, and Uncle George and Aunt Lenore spoke to a friend of theirs, Sorkins, and gave me the humbling experience to work at an auto radiator factory, cleaning the toilets. How great was it for a college kid to work as a janitor? Okay, Uncle George is open to the floor.
well, I remember Uncle George. And there used to be a silver cigarette cup that every night he came home that I saw, he put it in the room, took out his golf club, and tried to get the golf ball. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Into this silver golf club. And he was terrific because he did it, but he used to do it for hours. And the other thing I remember, when my grandmother was there, they used to watch TV, and it was a big DuPont TV, and he'd go over to my grandmother about 10:30, and he'd say, "Hannah, is it time?" And Hannah would say yes, and then he'd go in the refrigerator and get her a big bowl of vanilla ice cream.
That's what you get then.
Family
Did he smoke?
tradition.
I was gonna say that's right.
What?
Did he smoke?
Did he smoke?
Before I was born, my father smoked, and in his early 20s, the doctor said he had Berger's disease, which is a circulatory disease in the legs. And the doctor said if you continue smoking, you'll be cutting your legs off in a few years. And he stopped smoking.
But did he smoke cigars?
No,
No.
he smoked cigarettes.
As far
Morton and
as I
Sam.
remember my aunt telling me that he drank a little,
He did drink a
too
lot.
much.
Yes, as a matter of fact, as the story goes, of course, I don't remember this at all. Well, first of all, my mother said when they were in New York, or they were dating, my father, they had a wonderful time. All the chorus girls knew my father in town. His nickname was Jigsy, apparently. And I would, they'd go out, mom and dad would go out to dinner, and they go to some place, and these girls would go, "Hi, Jigsy." So I guess he was.
Ladies' man.
He was a player, I don't know. What would you call him?
Well, my aunt was very upset,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether he went to some organization, but after he stopped, he never drank again.
No, what happened was, I don't remember this, but They had, you know, these inspectors for the meat factory. And one of his friends was one of the inspectors was his friend. I remember his last name was Murphy. So he was a good Irishman. And my father and he would go out and have a few. And Grandma and Grandpa were up visiting us, apparently. And my mother's story to me was that we, in our apartment in Brookline, Mass, had a long hall, and the rooms were, you know, off of that long hall, and the living room and entry was over here. So apparently, when my dad got drunk, he was bouncing off the walls. And I said, something's wrong, Dad, he's bouncing off the walls. And so my grandparents there, Lenore said,
They were married.
yeah, well, I was
He was-
around.
he was there.
And I hope they were married. But anyway, as the story goes, she said, if you don't stop right down,
Right.
Pat and I are going back with my parents to New York, and you'll never see us again. So we
See-
stopped cold turkey. We never had another drink. He wouldn't even eat food I made with wine in it.
And that's, I found out, because we were in that station, that tan station wagon, and he was sort of out of it. And he was bouncing back and forth, and he couldn't walk out. And my aunt came over and said, your Uncle George is a little bit high. And that's when I found out. She told me. And then, but he never drank after that.
Never.
And I never knew a person who was so devoted to his two women, to Patty and my aunt. I mean, you could tell how much his love was for my aunt. Because my aunt, I always thought she was the boss. Whatever she wanted, but I didn't live with her. But,
That's basically.
but
She was in some.
she was always,
Oh, we could speak to that.
whatever she got.
Georgie was so protective of Pat, he gave me a 19-year warranty.
Ooh, how sexist.
He did.
That's better than the beds.
Because of my hearing and the ambient noise, I don't know if you talked at all about when Morton came up to Boston, to the hospital, New England Baptist,
A
to have
little
his
bit,
hip
but maybe you have
operations.
some other side of the story.
Well, I used to visit Morton every day on my way home, and I would walk in, and he raised his eyebrows, and I'd take out a cigar, and the two of us would have a cigar for about an hour together. That I remember very clearly. The other thing is, the first year we met, when you were still at Columbia, and I would come down sometimes to see you, is we would have Friday night dinner at Gigi's, and Morton was so glad to see me. He would always bring out a beer. The two of us would have a beer together. No one else drinks beers. So, just another memory.
He should have done it with his he could have done it with his grandchildren.
He drank beer regularly?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Who did?
Every night
How
at
many
dinner,
of you were
he had a
21
can of
when he
beer.
Frank
Right, yeah.
died? I could have,
Do you remember
but
that?
Wasn't it used to be 18? I was younger at one point.
not when you were.
No,
or
no.
me
How you could forget
in
that?
DC.
I don't remember when I was drinking. Occasionally.
What was the
I
brand?
remember him drinking beer.
Morton and George were loving brothers to each other. They were so loving at all the different stages. I mean, it sounds like we're idealizing it, but that was really true. I mean, I think there was a theme that in-laws
Yeah.
and outlaws, everybody was really loved within that circle and accepted. You know, and I remember when my dad was so sick and on dialysis at the end, and Morton would come to Judy, but, and to my folks' place, and, you know, what did he say to you?
When I went down to visit the weekend before Georgie died, and unfortunately hospice wasn't coordinating, and Georgie was in a lot of pain and really suffering. And I remember when I went down there and I walked into the bedroom, and when I came out of the bedroom, the expression on my face was such that I remember Morton saying to me, "Paul, that's not Georgie in there." As if to say to me, don't remember him that way. That's not who he was.
But the point is, Morton was there too, always. And boy, do we I loved Uncle Morton so much. And you know, I loved Madeline dearly too. When I used to come down to New York, and I'd kiss Grandma hello, and then she'd say, "Go say hello to everybody." So I'd have to walk all over Parkchester to say hello to Aunt Kitty, Aunt Becky, Lenora, Rose, and then of course, my biggest treat was to go up to see Auntie Madeline, and she would be sitting when you first came in the door, and there was the table right away, and she'd be sitting there smoking with her good friend May down the hall, because they had a dear friendship, and they would be chatting, and then we would have dinner there that night, or she would make her wonderful soup and everything. Madeline was a beautiful woman, but I know you're going to be talking.
Okay,
Yeah.
good segue.
Well, don't you guys have anything to say about Uncle and Lenore, Uncle George? Because you all knew them. Like, we're at people now that, like Madeline, we didn't know, but.
Oh, can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
She would have gone crazy having granddaughters. You know, and I could identify having had two sons like she did,
Right.
and then having granddaughters. But, so I got the benefit of her loss
Right.
those years, because she loved buying me things. And I get these beautiful sweaters for birthday.
Well, my mom used to say she would have given us the moon if she could have.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Oh, she would have been out of her mind with
Sorry.
thrill and joy, yeah.
She wouldn't have liked you, so it doesn't matter.
She would
She
have.
had her full of boys.
She would have
That
given
was our
David up for
normal,
another
that was
girl.
my normal existence. Your dad's favorite, your mom's favorite, I was just kind of.
Did you want to say something that you brought up?
Well, I just, you know, Aunt Lenore and Uncle George were sort of like grandparents to me more than they were aunt and uncles. And they were two people that just made you feel love from the minute that you walked into the room. And I can hear their voice. Like, she actually, I'm gonna say, she had to walk out because she started crying looking at the book. And she looked at me and she goes, "I can hear her voice."
Yeah, I can hear.
And it's just something, like, they were just, but we all knew them, so I just thought, all the other people we've been talking about, we didn't really know that well, so I didn't know if anybody, you know, we all have our experience with them, because we were all old enough to know them well enough.
My memories of Lenore are clearer than they are of George. I mean, George, I just remember him being a lot of fun when we were up in Massachusetts. And it was, I don't really remember him, except for maybe the bar mitzvah is yours. I remember Lenore really clearly. I mean, having conversations with her and her voice. But I also think, you know, we talked about Lenore being kind of dapper and somewhat stylish. I kind of remember George being pretty stylish.
Yeah, for sure.
They were kind of a dapper couple.
Yeah.
You know, I remember he dressed well. Yeah, there's some classy about both of them.
Not when he came home from the factory every night.
I
I'd
didn't
run
do
up
that
to her,
part. I didn't see any of that.
I'd say, "Hi, Dad," and in his pocket would be a hot dog. Because he was testing something on the way out, and he wore this old coat, and he wasn't dapper. My mother would just be on his tail. George, get rid of that old sweater. That old
She really
coat.
dressed him.
He looked great.
But he had a pair of, what are those, not
Spats.
spats? Were they spats? Yeah.
What are spats?
Yeah, and my mother was told the story that they were so old, and finally she got rid of it and put it in the trash, out the trash.
What are they?
Or
Spats?
spats, they were black and white shoes or brown and white shoes?
Brown and white.
Whatever, and he loved them.
Like spectators?
Something
Or
like
like
that.
saddles?
No,
No,
no.
it's almost
Okay.
like a golf shoe, but
Okay.
Yeah, like a spectator.
Anyway,
Like a
and
wingtip.
then a week
Yeah.
later, she'd see him back in, because he got to the garbage. So they did this routine for a while. But that's interesting, you thought, he was a handsome young man, yeah.
Yeah. I
He was a
remember.
handsome older man,
Yeah,
he
for
was.
sure. They were beautiful.
I would just add, I think for Mike and I both, we never got to meet our grandmothers. So Eleanor really was the closest thing that,
Yeah.
we both had to a grandmother, and she treated us the same way. When I was up in Boston at school, all the times that we would go pick her up from her home, to bring her out to dinner, even if it was just going to Pat and Paul's house, just going out for a little place for dinner, she was always dressed up like we were going out to like a ball. I always remember, like I'd show up, my college, shirt, jeans, whatever, and she was dressed. I was like, "We're going somewhere fancy, man. Look at me." We didn't even need to be, but that was just the way she was and the way she dressed. And that's definitely the impression that I'll always remember visually about her. But she was just always so kind, so nice, always asking how school was going while I was up there, and just always cared, always.
Her smile was enchanting.
I remember the day that Mom and I went to Curry College. And you know how we got to Curry College? It was Bernice.
car.
What?
My car.
No, right, but it was Bernice's had a cousin, or Nat had a friend who was the president of Curry College. One of the many cousins on the cousin Buzzin side. And
Well,
so-
Bernice also danced with Lenore.
and Bernice danced with Lenore in showbiz, yeah. And so, he was a very nice man, and we told him about you and what a wonderful guy you are, and, to have lost your mom as soon as you had left her and gone off to college, and it just, wasn't easy to get through your freshman year, and he was just so compassionate and so nice. And there we were, and she got you in.
Pat, do you remember, Dad talked a little bit before about your grandmother bringing him down to when Hal was born. Were you in Boston at that point when Hal was born?
Yes, but I have no memory of that.
Did your mom, did you come down? Like, do you remember
You were
meeting
so
Hal?
young.
How young were you?
You guys are only,
I'm
what, 2
only-
years apart?
No,
Right.
no, almost 5 years apart. So I was 5. I think we had just moved to Boston.
Okay.
Right, because I was just starting kindergarten when we moved. My dad was working for, this is another interesting part about with Hannah. My dad was working for a company in New York that was making certain fat and stuff for the Russian army. From
Fat?
the meat, yeah, the Russian army was dying, and they needed,
Oh,
it was
right.
cold, and anyway, they were
just needed-
developing this whole
yeah.
fat stuff, which they were used to eating, which keep them more alive and on the front. So, but then, once the war was over, that factory closed down, and he needed a job, and then he lived in Philly for a while and would commute. And that was when Grandma had the accident. So then at a certain point, he didn't have a job, so after Grandma's accident, his uncles gave him a job in Boston, and that's why he left. But the point being is that in those days, when Hannah had her accident, there was no insurance, and the city didn't give any money. So the whole family, that whole family got together to pay her hospital bills. And, even for my parents, I don't know about your folks, if you had stories of it, that my father went to his wealthy uncles in Boston to ask them for some money. They didn't give him any money. But the people in our apartment building in Washington Heights came down with $50, $100, and lent money. I don't know, where did your parents, I mean, your parents was trying to help out too, when Grandma's accident. Do you remember anything about that, or
No.
know any stories about where the money came from?
My father came up every week with an envelope that he gave to either Grandma or Grandpa. And Uncle Izzy is the one that gave him a loan.
Oh,
I
they did, when
think
she was in the
Grandma-
hospital?
They only got $30,000 for the accident because Grandma didn't want to go to court. If she would want to go to court, they would have gotten much more.
Could have been millionaires by now.
But she wanted to settle out of court. And to settle out of court, they only gave her $30,000. But during how we paid for the hospital, I think Uncle Izzy gave them $10,000, and they had to pay him back
Okay, I didn't know that.
Out of the 30.
Out of the 30.
Close the book.
Sorry?
Close the book, we're working.
Okay.
Okay, next thing.
He's tough.
We have to move along.
Okay,
Say that to anybody else.
because nobody was looking at the book.
Waiting
Wait,
all
whose
these
birthday
years
is it
to
this
tell you
week?
what to do. Finally.
So my mother, she meant everything to me as a child. I was a mama's boy, but you could be anything else when you had the greatest mother. I didn't know any other way. Besides being the best cook, again, learning from Grandma, we had great meals together. When he was gone already and my father was working nights, she made great friends in Parkchester. Our house was the headquarters, as Patty said. May O'Connor, Hilda, Dottie, all would come over for coffee any day of the week. Coffee and Danish at all hours of the day. May O'Connor called our crumb cake schnublies, which lasts even now. Steve and I had such a warm, caring, and loving environment to grow up in. She just had her way about her that you felt so protected, and she would do anything for you, and she did. One of the reasons I am always early is because my mother was notoriously late for every event. That was her reputation. When coming home from a family event, my mother would always wait to be home, and she had to go to the bathroom. Well, one night she came home and she needed to pee very badly. But
This is a great memory.
Where is this going?
this is a great memory. You don't remember it?
Wait, listen.
Okay, so she stopped at the dining room table, picked up one leg, and was hopping. She had to go to the bathroom so bad. So Steve and I started a train. And she would be first, and then Steve and myself, and then we just hopped around the living room. Because, the choo-choo train. And we were laughing hysterically. Which also, another one of the times we were,
That must have made it really difficult for her to make.
Yeah, I know, I was thinking.
I don't know if she ever made it, but we had a lot of fun.
But if you're laughing at the same time, it'll be
Yes.
sadder.
We're trying that tonight at dinner.
Okay.
Good, Dan.
I'll leave it.
Make sure your dad has a lot to drink.
I remember it was my second week at college, and I had a Saturday English class, and I was called to the dorm director's office, pulled out of class. He was very nice, and he proceeded to tell me that my mother had passed away. I was paralyzed just out of the blue like that. Adele and Tom O'Connor came up to school to take me home. I remember just staring out the window all the way. I remember coming home to my apartment with a house full of people. I went into my bedroom with my father and brother and just cried. I know that she's guiding us, smiling and being proud of all the Spiro family. Oh, that's all right. Next.
This is a dramatic pause.
You know, I wasn't there at the time. I'm gonna give you a hug.
Maybe O'Connor didn't guess that's her boyfriend.
Is he a
I didn't
neighbor?
realize-
Tom O'Connor, neighbor?
Tom and Matt and
And Adele.
May.
Tom and May were Madeline and Morton's best friends.
They-
Very close.
well, they would come in more often than anybody else for cake and coffee.
And then Tom and Adele was my mom, right?
Adele, yeah.
Came to get you at
Right.
school.
Yeah.
Tom is the reason I don't drink.
That's what I thought. That's how I knew his name.
Because I would go into their apartment, and he was an Irish cop, no offense, Mary. But he drank, I never saw him not drinking. And just the smell of that alcohol turned me off to drinking.
So,
And
sorry, Madeline and Morton's best friends weren't Jewish. I just find that really interesting.
no, but then there was Hilda on the same floor, and Dottie,
Yeah,
and
it's very interesting.
No,
It's
but they
I met Dottie.
They had wonderful friends from high school, couples. In fact, the rabbi that married Mom and I was their best friend.
I didn't know that.
That's the one that officiated at their 50th wedding anniversary.
Right, Manny.
Right, Manny?
Manny
Yeah.
Schenk.
He's on the tape I gave you.
And they were always close, and there were 5 couples that used to meet every month. And they either met in Manhattan, because that's where most of them lived. But the rabbi who did our wedding, and he was there on the side for my bar mitzvah, they went to school, high school together.
you know, I always use as an example how life has changed from there. When we lived in Parkchester, grandmothers lived in the same building and one around the corner. We had all these cousins around. But then I use you guys as an example that one lives in Belize, one lives in Oregon, one was living in France, one was living in wherever, Nepal. I mean, it's a major change,
It is.
and that's why we're not as close as we would all want to be because of the distance and, you know, seeing each other. But this is a way to reconnect and feel better.
I always felt really bad, not bad, but I feel like I didn't get as much time with Papu as I wanted, like, you know, especially when he was getting older or he passed. I was like, oh, you know, my other grandparents I saw more because they lived a lot closer, but when we saw them fairly regularly, if I remember correctly, but then once he moved to Florida, I was, you know, very, very far and few
Well,
between. I
you
don't
could have
really-
visited in Florida if you brought towels.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, my mother wasn't having that, so we were not doing that.
I don't know if I could add anything to what Harold said, but my mom cared about her 2 boys more than any of my friends that I saw cared about their children. And cared about my father and loved my father. My dad used to get home at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3-4 nights a week. And every night she was there, and they always had a cup of coffee and a piece of cake, talked about their boys or talked about the day, and then they went to sleep. And then Mom got up 5 hours later to get either Harold and I off to school. She would never miss a night. And my parents never missed a day without that cup of coffee and piece of cake and their conversation of how their day went. And, there was nothing that the both of them wouldn't do for us. I mean, I remember, I don't talk about my mom, but I'll talk about them both. I remember my father, he was home for dinner either 2 or 3 nights a week. The rest of the time he came up late. But every single night of my life, he'd come up from the station, stop in the 5 and 10, get a little toy for me or Harold, and come in every single night for years. And they loved, and you felt so deeply their love. There was nothing more important than their 2 boys. And I think that the love that Harold and I received, I hope we gave to our children. That we should always be there for them, love them, and how proud we are. They are the joys of my life. And they were the best. And I can share the call I got on that Wednesday evening. I just got home from school, and Adele was making me dinner at her apartment in Parkchester, and Suzanne called.
Wait, Mom had an apartment in Parkchester?
We did. We were married.
Oh.
That's where our first apartment was. And I got home about 9, and she called me, I don't know, about 10, to tell me about what happened with Mom. And
Because she was in California.
they were in California.
So Harold didn't find out till the next day?
Right. And,
Did you find out before Pop?
oh yeah,
You were the first one.
I was the first one she
You
called.
had to tell.
Pardon?
You had to tell Pop.
Yeah. So then, we got off the phone,
Of course Suzanne would call you because she was.
and we called my in-laws, and they came over to our apartment. Now it's midnight,
Mac and Elsie.
Mark and Elsie.
Grandma?
And then I had the key to Dad's apartment, and the 4 of us went to my father's apartment and sat there. And then about 1:30, Dad came in, and he was shocked.
Did you tell him,
And,
Stephen?
pardon?
Did you tell him?
Yeah.
That must have
And
been so hard.
I said that Mom had a heart attack. And he said, oh my God. And I said, Dad, she didn't make it. And we had a doctor there. My father said we should have a doctor there. And he gave my dad a sedative. And
Oh,
I-
Pop,
my-
Max said you should have a doctor there?
yeah, my in-laws went home, and Adele slept in our room, and Dad and I slept in his room. And I guess we cried for about 2 hours, and I remember saying, what do I do now? What do I do now? And as much as you try to calm a person, it was difficult. And the sedative hit, and he swept, and then,
Wait, where was Hal?
pardon?
At college. This is the
Oh,
night.
at college. So Tom and my mom went to college.
Yeah. And
then
then,
Big
Yeah.
education.
and then we woke up the next morning, and we made all the arrangements for the funeral. And I think it was my aunt Lenora and my grandmother called all the family, and my father and I went to the funeral home and came back, and then at night Harold walked in. And I don't remember Dad coming into the room. I remember you and I going into the room. Just crying and talking about how much we loved her. We stayed there for about an hour, and then my dad came in and said, please come out. Grandma and everyone was about to leave, and please say goodnight to them. So we came out, and everyone left.
And what, you were 26 and you were 18, or?
Yeah, just 18.
Yeah.
And I stayed with my father again that night, and Adele stayed in with Harold. And then the next day, we went home, and it was the funeral.
How did you get the
How did
How did you
Nana get to New York?
New York?
How did Nana?
How did she die
How did
in
Madeline get to
California?
New York?
Oh, we had that's why the funeral was delayed, because we had to fly her from California, to fly the body from California.
Did Rosalie come?
I was just thinking the same thing. And Suzanne?
No.
Rosalie and
But Rosalie
Murray.
was too sick,
Oh yeah, that's right.
because
That's
she
why
went
she was
out to
there.
go
Right,
help,
yeah,
to
right.
help her.
She had a cancer operation.
But Suzanne didn't come?
No,
She's probably had to be with her mom.
no. She was taking care of Rosalie, and she and I talked. I said, listen, you'll come later.
And she had two children by then.
Yeah, I have a story that kind of brings that full circle. When Michelle and Elise and I went down to Florida to say goodbye to Pop, we were pretty sure it was going to be the last time we saw him. He was in hospice, and he wasn't energetically talking, but you could talk to him.
Yeah, it was a great
His
trip. It was a
brain
great
was
trip.
fully on board.
Still cracking jokes.
Yeah, he was still cracking jokes, but when I went to say goodbye to him, like we were leaving, it was like the first time he looked at me as an adult. Like I wasn't, and had said something kind of serious. And he just said, I'm ready and I miss Madeline.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yes,
Yep.
he told
I
me.
miss Madeline.
He said, Steve, I don't want you to get upset. I love you, but it's time for me to go with Mommy.
Yeah, you really loved her.
He said that to you?
And there's such a difference in my mind the way I left my mother in feeling and the way I left my father. With my father, I had enough time to tell him how much I loved him. He told me how proud he was of me. And we said goodbye. And it's a wonderful feeling.
I mean, I think the worst part of losing your mom, aside from that you were both so young, is that it was a complete and utter shock.
Yeah. And with my mom, I didn't. And the one regret, I'm sure Harold has the same regret, that my mother never met her grandchildren.
I have the same regret. I think Elise does too.
Right.
And the
What?
saying goodbye
That
part,
your mom never
you know,
Oh,
is
she met her,
is,
though.
it is the biggest blessing. You know, those little things that tell you. I'll never forget the doctor that told me when I was in Jakarta, just come home and do it. That was the best advice because I had time to say goodbye. It makes a huge difference.
Well, I have one funny Morton Madeline that I read in a letter from, so Madeline's sister Rosalie and her father, who ran the theater, were pen pals when either of them would travel, and I have all the letters. And he called his daughter Moochie Poochie, so it would always be like, dear Moochie Poochie. And I guess Rosalie was married by then, and she was traveling because he was in New York. Sam was in New York, and he wrote about Madeline and Morton being engaged, and Madeline having a hope chest, because I guess there was still a little southernness because Sam had grown up in New Orleans, so there was a whole southern kind of thing. So she had a hope chest, and in the letter from 1927, It says, and Morton is walking all over the place telling everyone he saw Madeline's bare chest. And I thought to myself, oh my God, the man has the same sense of humor.
Pop was a funny guy, but Pop was a funny guy
I have the
himself.
letter.
Pop was always joking. I don't remember, I think probably his biggest disappointment in you guys is that you guys never learned the mouse.
Never learned the
The
what?
napkin,
mouse.
the napkin mouse, you never learned it.
None of us did. We
napkin
tried.
mouse.
We tried so hard. He tried so hard to teach all of us. Even Dennis, I
Nobody
think
could
he
get it
tried
to
to teach.
move the way
none of
he,
us could.
nobody could get it to move the way he got
He
it
did.
to move.
That was the, we hadn't mentioned the mouse. The mouse was huge.
How, I mean, God,
And
we
David
love
and
that.
That's how
I,
he entered.
David and I used to make potions in his cigar containers, all his
He
little
used to
cigars.
smoke his cigars. They,
That was
they
in
came
the little
in those
plastic
They
containers.
looked like little
Oh, yeah.
beaker tubes
Yes.
or whatever, test
So
tubes.
we used to
And
always have him
he would
playing
give
with
them to
those,
us,
yeah.
and then we would play with
Make
them.
little- make little potions in them and
potions
stuff.
He used to tell me that the ashes were fertilizer, and I swear till I was an adult, I believed that until someone told me it wasn't true.
I remember in Florida when you guys would come down to visit him and how Mike,
No,
what
Dan.
you did with the cane, and you guys
stickers?
decorated, both of you did. The stickers you decorated. He was so proud to show his friends.
They were glow in the dark.
They're going
Oh,
dark.
that's perfect.
How old was he when he started smoking cigars? Not when you were a kid.
I always remember himself smoking
Really?
cigars.
Smoked cigars that
I
long?
still think of him when I smell a cigar. If I smell
Yeah,
a
me
cigar
too.
So,
anywhere.
you know, because his father always smoked cigars. So.
But the difference between my grandfather and my grandfather used to chew 'em,
Yes.
and my father never chewed.
And it's interesting too, Grandpa always had a mustache, and Morton never had a mustache, did he? Because then Grandpa's mustache.
Actually, he
Yeah, 'cause
did
you never did.
occasionally.
Morton had a mustache?
You remember that? Is it? Don't you have the picture from his union, like the
Oh, yeah.
40 pictures, and one
Maybe
of them
you get
did
rid of
have a
that, too.
mustache.
No, he still has
But that doesn't mean he had it on for long.
Yeah, but.
But I remember that there was a mustache. You
Yes,
look.
Chris put it
Yeah,
together.
it's amazing. I don't know.
perfect.
Have you seen it?
I mean, who-
Yeah, I think Chris put that.
Yeah,
Yeah, she
Chris
did.
did.
It's awesome.
looking very good people as adults, you know, not like kids with their classroom picture.
Michael, do you have anything to say
Yeah.
about my father?
Yeah.
It's really
He
interesting.
was very proud of being a union.
No.
I prefer to be on the
No,
other
I'm
end.
You know, can I ask one
understand
question that hasn't, no one has mentioned, I mean, you mentioned, at one point, you mentioned it very slightly, rabbi, but you guys have not talked at all about what kind of role the temple or
About
the
what?
Jewish community played growing up.
Oh, I'll tell you. I was supposed to be bar mitzvahed. They didn't send me to Hebrew school until the second, it was just 3-year program. I didn't get sent until the second year. So I was behind the year, and these kids had already had a year. So I made it through 2 years of Hebrew school. And my major accomplishment was going across the street to the candy store and having candy in my pockets and eating the candy while the Hebrew school was going on.
But you went to Hebrew school, remember you told me you used to walk home with Michael.
Well, we went through the whole thing. We started at 8 years old, and you went every Sunday. Then at 9,
This is
you started Hebrew school, and you went Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then your 4th year, you went every day
What?
for an hour. And then your 5th year,
Yeah.
you only went for bar mitzvah lessons.
Did you guys get confirmed, either of you?
No.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad.
I did.
We did, yeah.
I did.
And actually
because-
Madeline did. I
but
have the
but
picture.
nobody-
And my
no
father.
woman got bas mitzvah because it was a
Right.
reformed temple.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean, it was a different temple.
That's right, Madeline probably never was bat mitzvah.
But
But-
David,
but the
I bet he
joke-
probably got an album though out of it.
The joke
did.
about my parents,
Yeah.
the joke about my parents is that on Yom Kippur,
Oh, yeah.
they used to go to Yiska at 11 o'clock. Yiska was over at 12:30, and then everyone would come back to our house to break fast.
At 12:30.
Do you know, you talk about your album,
That's usually way later.
and I'm trying to get a hold of what's called its mother. because
Okay,
she.
just so everybody knows, David never got a bar
She
mitzvah
was
album.
the-
My mother
my-
never made it, and we
and
don't
my
know where the
parents
pictures
lost the
are.
photo.
But I do. Your friend's mother has the pictures.
No, she has Elisa's pictures.
No, she
No.
does yours.
She
Cynthia
did you.
Nielsen was not my photographer.
Okay.
She
Who
was
was?
Elisa's photographer.
Okay.
David,
You guys
they
hired the same person that
lost
did
the
Eric
pictures.
Trailman's photographer to do mine.
Okay, I don't remember that, but I'm not gonna argue about it right now.
Yeah.
Who's
Okay.
next?
I
Getting
just,
back-
just getting in terms of religion, I just know from the story, my parents were not too religious, you know, we were all reformed. And Grandpa, from what my mom told me, was very involved in the Reform Judaism and in the temple. But, and as he was with the Democratic Party too, those were his two passions. But Morton and Madeline all went to the same temple youth group.
Right.
But you didn't like go every Friday or anything.
Or do the Shabbos candles every
No.
You
Friday
didn't
night?
do any
No.
of that.
No.
So it was
I don't
it was
remember.
basically how we were raised.
Yes.
You know, and you were talking about how we grew up in Parkchester. All my friends were Jewish, but that was just such a small segment of Parkchester of 50,000 people. So now I'm on Facebook in Parkchester group, and they had a reunion. They had over 300 people, okay? And I looked at all the names, and there was maybe 2 or 3 that were Jewish.
Well, I didn't.
But
Listen,
they were there, but it just, there was a clique you were
in
in.
our apartment house, the friends I with, 2 went to my public school, the rest went to St. Helena's and St.
Right.
Raymond's.
Yeah.
And that's why it was broken up. I would be friendly and play punch ball with the kids at 5 or 6, but then when we went to separate schools, you know, we were never friendly again. But I thought that was an interesting dynamic in Parkchester.
Well,
Okay.
I think, could I just add?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that era was such, and it always was. I mean, I think Grandpa belonged, when they lived in the Lower East Side, there was the Jewish side of the street, there was the Italian side of the street, and there was the Irish side of the street. And all the guys had gangs.
Yeah, the 6th Street gang.
Yeah,
You
the
told
6th
me
Street
about it when I was
hotshots.
living on 5th Street.
Right,
I remember
right.
that.
Grandpa had, your great-grandpa had a gang
Samuel,
called the,
right?
yeah, and it was called the 6th Street Hotshots. But I think it was the same all over, because like even growing in Massachusetts and growing up in Brookline, it was primarily Jewish or Irish Catholic. And all my Irish Catholic friends that I went to early elementary school with, or my subsequent Irish Catholic friends who grew up in Brookline, but I didn't know them in high school, and went to parochial school.
Right.
So, and then there were some Protestants I remember growing up with, but it was more broken down into
You and I
segregated
had
groups. It
this
was like
conversation.
Balkanism, you know?
Yeah. I remember you telling me this.
And communities were like that, but now I think in a lot of communities it's much more mixed.
Yeah, right.
You know, so
Well,
it
we
was
were-
just that
we
kind
were
of
in the
era.
mix.
Yeah.
Okay, I just had some other things about my father. My father's greatest gift was a sense of humor. How many times have we said that's a Mortonism? Even yesterday, we said it, and today already. All his buddies down in Florida loved playing gin with him and enjoyed his company. And so many told us so. My father was a hardworking man who worked 2 jobs without the benefit of a car for transportation. He would come home at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning after visiting Grandma that night, and then have to get up at 6 o'clock and do it all over again. He provided for his family. I remember when I was about 5, my mother said to my father, "Teach Harold about baseball." He said, "Don't worry." And now look what happened to Dan, Mike, and myself. I mean, it's in our genes.
Excuse me, it's time to hold up the Red Sox shirt.
Yeah. Not Yankees, Red Sox.
I remember what a thrill it was going with him and a friend on a Saturday afternoon by subway to the Sanders Theater and walk in for free, getting free candy and popcorn, and picking the best 2 seats in the house. It was worth the trip. Next.
Well, I remember him taking my friends and I to the theater. We used to go into the luncheonette outside. We used to have lunch, and then there was a line waiting to get into the movies. And my friend and I always felt so good. We just walked in and didn't pay. And he'd always get us 2 boxes of candy. And we sat up in the balcony.
Oh, we sat downstairs.
He liked you better.
I don't know, he wanted us close.
Okay, no, I mean, that's okay.
Um,
We had the better seats.
So yes, I do.
I remember the George Washington Bridge. He would tell me when he'd come to visit me in New Jersey in Pine Brook about his whole trip. That he would go there, and he would go over the George Washington Bridge, and then it was every time. Every time he came. You two were too young there.
Yeah.
I would get the whole traffic. I don't know how many other bridges he went, but the George Washington Bridge I remember.
Morton learned how to drive later.
Yes.
Yeah, he had that blue car. What was that? Was that a Buick or a Cadillac?
No, Chevy.
Was it
Chevy.
One of the
Impala.
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 I remember him driving that.
one of the things that
Judy had these sunglasses that were bigger than
I
his
remember
head.
him saying to me, which truly hurt me, and we talked about it. He never thought that he achieved.
That he
Achieved.
achieved.
And I think part of it is, that part of it, his family made him feel that way.
Right.
And I remember when he moved down to Florida, we sat one day and I said, "How you doing, Daddy?" He asked how I was doing. He said, "Steve, you wouldn't believe it. Even the rich people love me down here." And I said, "Dad, how could you say that?" I said, "The most important thing in the world," I remember saying this, "the most important thing in the world, that there isn't a father or a mom who loved you more than any of these guys down here who were wealthy." And then he said, "Well, maybe you're right." But I'll never forget what he said. "Steve, you wouldn't believe it, all these rich people love me." Because he had the great sense of humor, and he was always joking.
But that's the way he was brought up, and he didn't have that
Right.
fulfillment of success. But now if you look at it and see what my mother and father accomplished with all their family, I mean, who's better? I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Right, but he didn't internalize
Right.
that, and because,
But he
you know,
got-
in the context of the times, you know, making a living and providing
Right.
for your wife and family was the measure of success
Yeah.
of a man.
But even though I'm sure his parents never said that, that's how they made him feel.
Right.
And the proof of the pudding, as I told you the other night, that when I had an announcement that I became vice president of Blue Rose, and we all went to my grandmother's apartment, and we're all going out for dinner. And I came in, and my grandmother hugged me, and she said, "Finally, a Spiro ship has come in." And I just felt horrible. I remember going home and crying. So, anyway.
Pat, is there anything you wanted to add? No.
Well, I just thinking that, you know,
He's like Phil Donahue.
he's our group therapist tonight.
Yes, that's
I felt you had something coming out.
Honestly,
God, is there anything you'd like to
my friends who do group psychotherapy would be very proud of you. I see the expression on your face. Was there something you'd like to add?
Go ahead, young man.
Oh. Okay, so
I think we were waiting for
I'm
Pat
ready
to
to
say
go on to another topic.
Well,
never
in
gave her a
terms
chance to
of,
talk.
in terms of Morton, I adored Uncle Morton. I just thought everything emanated from him. He was just a great guy. I didn't have uncles on the other side of my family. My dad's two brothers were dead. And so Uncle Morton was it for uncles. I mean, my father's sister, oh no, my father
Yeah, did
had
you have
two
uncles?
sisters, yes. And Aunt Nan, who was not a wonderful, great aunt, but her husband, Uncle Joe, was a great guy, yeah. And he would get down on the floor and play with me. But Morton, I just loved when we went to New York. I just felt always safe with Morton, and I always felt so accepted by him. He just, if Morton let you in, you were in, and he was there for you always. And I always was so jealous of my mother having a big brother, too. And you know how much, we already talked about how much she loved having her big brother. But anyway, I just adored
That's why
Morton.
Steve and I were here for you.
That's
A
right.
little brother and a big brother.
That's right. That's true.
Okay?
True.
All right, so now we're going to Pat and Paul. The women of the Spiro family are special. Grandma, Aunt Lenore were great role models for Pat. But she raised the bar by working as a social worker to help others, too. Patty and Paul were so gracious when I was at Northeastern being invited over for dinner. Thank goodness I had Dan and Mike to help me, not help me, for them to finally bring up that heavy glass leaf for the dining room table.
We put Harold to work, and then we put Danny to work. That's why
My
Michael
arms
didn't
are
go-
still
that's
sore
why-
from that table.
That's
Doesn't
why
get any
Michael didn't
better.
go to school in Boston. He was afraid what we'd make him do.
Okay, so this is one of the legendary stories. I was up at Patty and Paul's for an interview the next day, and Pat and Paul left for work in the morning. I then realized that I forgot to pack my dress shoes. So all I had were my sneakers. So I went up to Paul's closet to see if he had an extra pair, which I knew he'd have an extra pair of dress shoes. So it was a problem when I saw his size was 8 and mine was 10 and a half. So I squeezed into them, took the interview in a very high-pitched voice. I was going to send the shoes back the next day, but that night Paul accused Dennis of losing them, right?
Right.
And
That was missing in the house. It was always Dennis's fault. So we fixed it.
fast forward to the summer.
Does Dennis know this?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, fast forward to this summer when we were up and Paul misplaced his glasses. And I know